Don't let it end like this. Tell them I said something. Pancho Villa, 1923. In 1910, revolution broke out in Mexico. Francisco I. Madero, a Mexican writer, led an uprising against President Diaz, beginning a struggle that went on for 10 years. Concerned about the safety of the American citizens, the United States government sent troops to the border between the states and Mexico. Not long after that, the U.S. was brought into the war. Madero issued a proclamation to citizens in San Antonio, Texas, to revolt against the Mexican government. As the war went on, Mexican border towns were destroyed, and the United States continued to build their forces. It wasn't until Pancho Villa, a Mexican bandit, raided Columbus, New Mexico in March of 1916 that the United States launched a plan of their own. It was decided that Villa had to be caught, so President Wilson ordered Jack Pershing to take men into Mexico, thus beginning the famous punitive expedition. Often referred to as the Pancho Villa expedition, it remains one of the most disorganized failures in American history. Born Jose Arambula in 1878, Villa was one of the Mexican Revolution's greatest generals. James Hunt argues that, for Villa, the political future of Mexico was of primary importance. He was called up in the Northern Division when Madero made himself president in 1912 to assist General Huerta to put down a revolution in Chihuahua. Once complete, Villa announced that him and his men, called Willistas, would be departing Huerta's army. An order for his execution was put out. Villa fled to the United States, only to return to Mexico to fight Huerta. By this time, his following had grown significantly. It had become the Northern Division, and he had joined forces with Carranza in order to rebel against Huerta. However, when Villa realized Carranza had no intention of continuing the revolution, they became enemies. The United States recognized the government of Carranza in 1915. Villa continued to fight, but by the upper half of the decade it was clear that he was losing. In need of supplies, Villa and his men invaded the United States territory. A newspaper reported, "The city of Columbus, New Mexico was the scene of the attack, and a number of Americans were killed, including some soldiers, and many buildings were set fire to and burned before the intruders were driven across the international border into Mexico." However, the raid did not go how Villa had planned, and him and his men were chased back into Mexico defeated. The Washington Post called it the culmination of a long series of border outrages, which began in southeastern Texas early in August 1915. People of the United States were furious following the attack. Just because Villa had been defeated at the town didn't mean that these states went unharmed. The newspaper reported that more than 40 American soldiers now had been killed in the fighting and sniping along the Rio Grande. 12 or more civilians had met death, and scores had been wounded. The U.S. government was not about to let Villa get away unscathed. They demanded justice. Almost immediately, plans were made for a punitive expedition. The expedition began relatively organized. Since the U.S. had recognized the Mexican government, permission was asked before setting up a real chase. Telegrams were sent between the U.S. and Mexico in order to figure out the details. The government of the United States, in view of the unusual state of affairs which has existed for some time along the international boundary, and earnestly desiring to cooperate with the de facto government of Mexico to suppress the state of lawlessness of which the recent attack on Columbus, New Mexico is a deplorable example, and to ensure peace and order in the regions contiguous to the boundary between the two republics, readily grants permission for military forces of the de facto government of Mexico to cross the international boundary in pursuit of lawless bands of armed men. After assuring permission, the U.S. government got down to planning the mission. The Pancho Villa expedition officially began on March 14, 1916, just 5 days after the raid on Columbus. Pershing was put in charge of the mission by Wilson. He was instructed to create a force for himself. He arranged a provisional division of the army which consisted of 3 provisional brigades. The main base was set in Colonia du Blanc. Pershing's force technically contained about 5,000 men, but by the end, more than 10,000 soldiers had worked on it. It was not long before problems arose with the Carranza government. Because of this, the supplies had to come from army trucks driven from the United States. This use of truck convoys ended up being helpful practice for World War I. Pershing, whose group had a head start on the rest of the men, planned to get into the mountains where he would be able to hide. However, he would soon become reckless. Fought on March 29, 1916, the Battle of Guerrero was the first official battle in the expedition. It was fought by General Dodd and his cavalry. Many Willistas had been living in Guerrero, along with Villa himself. The attack came as a surprise to them. Many of Villa's men were killed or injured, but Villa managed to flee. The Americans continued pushing through Mexico in search of Villa. As they went, their relationship with the Mexican government started to deteriorate. James Brown Scott wrote, "It is to be hoped and it is to be presumed that the United States and Mexico either have or will come to an agreement regarding the pursuit of Villa." Unfortunately, this didn't happen as hoped. The president of Mexico believed Villa was messing with the United States government in order to get them involved in the revolution. Carranza was becoming more and more fed up with Pershing's troops in his country. In April, General Tompkins and his cavalry were attacked by Mexican troops outside of the town of Pearl in an effort to prevent further attacks. Pershing removed his cavalry from the Pearl area, but still continued on. Another month and a half passed. However, by June, it was clear that in order to avoid war, Pershing would have to retreat. While he began to pull back, he still attempted to pursue Villa. A battle towards the middle of June at Carrizal almost started the war. Fortunately, neither president wanted it, and things calmed. This was the last battle of the expedition. The Americans lost. Though the expedition was supposed to be over, the troops stayed. They weren't completely removed until January of 1917. It was finally declared over on February 7, 1917. One reason was to avoid war with Mexico. Also, many American citizens saw the expedition as a useless waste of both time and money. While some believed that Pershing had accomplished at least part of his goal, they still thought that it was right for him to return back. Second, despite 2 years of resistance, the United States was about to enter World War I. Most citizens were aware of the difficulty the troops had thanks to newspapers. Stories such as "Chasing Villa through the Mexican desert is proving no cinch" were published regularly. However, most were biased towards the Americans, praising Pershing for his efforts. Jack Pershing was proclaimed a hero, and this stuck with him through World War I. But this wasn't the only thing that the Americans got out of the expedition. We gained more experience, especially with trucks delivering food for the Great War. Still, this did not change the fact that the expedition was a failure. After almost a year, Pancho Villa remained uncaptured. He was assassinated in 1923, and the actual assassinator is still a mystery. Afterwards, many people tried to figure out why it even occurred in the first place. In a journal written a few years later, a scholar named Drippy says, "One searches in vain through the contemporary periodicals for a clear statement on the precedents upon which the enterprise was based. It is stated that we, as a country, have known what the people around the border were like. They were there, taking advantage of the lawlessness, and there was never a reason to put any effort into chasing them down, using valuable U.S. resources." Overall, the Pancho Villa expedition was an egg on the face of the United States military history.